She walked into first class wearing a hoodie, and every passenger froze, whispers, judging eyes. No one thought she belonged there, until a stranger stood up and changed everything. Stick around for this powerful true story, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that hit deep. The cabin went silent, unnaturally silent, the kind that feels like a wall of tension pressing against your skin. As the polished first-class door slid open with a soft click, all attention shifted in one unified moment. Framed by the entrance stood a young black woman in a slightly oversized gray hoodie, her baseball cap pulled low over her eyes. She was escorted in by a flight attendant whose navy blue uniform looked as tailored and pressed as the rows of suits that now turned to stare. The contrast between the two women was stark, one effortlessly blending into the world of luxury, the other standing out like an unexpected storm. Every head turned to look, but none with welcome. The businessman sipping an aged whiskey lowered his glass. The older white couple paused mid-conversation, their smiles faltering. Even the influencer who had been live-streaming her in-flight skincare routine froze, phone half raised. Judgment was not subtle here. It hung in the air like perfume. Jada Brooks, 23 years old and fresh out of Atlanta, had never been on a plane before, let alone inside the plush sanctuary of first class. A nursing student who worked nights at a care facility and spent days in school, Jada wasn't the kind of person these passengers expected to see in seat 2A. Not because of her skin color alone, though that was part of it, but because of everything else: the hoodie, the cap, the worn-out sneakers, and the timid look on her face. She clutched her boarding pass like a lifeline, her fingers visibly trembling. She wasn't scared of flying, but she was terrified of being seen. Not seen like noticed, seen like evaluated, measured, rejected, the kind of seeing that says you don't belong here. And Jada felt it in every step. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears, drowning out the low hum of the cabin. The flight attendant beside her smiled, but the corners of her eyes didn't match the curve of her lips. It wasn't warmth. It was protocol. A smile trained to exist regardless of comfort. "This way, Miss Brooks," the attendant said with the kind of polite precision that felt both courteous and cold. Jada gave a small nod, but her voice failed her. She tried to walk confidently, shoulders back, chin up, but she felt like a little girl lost in a department store pretending she knew where she was going. Every step down the narrow aisle of polished leather seats felt like a trial. She passed a row where a man in a tailored navy blazer glanced her up and down, then turned to his companion and whispered something behind his hand. Another passenger, an elderly woman draped in pearls, gave her a tight-lipped smile and subtly shifted her handbag from the seat beside her to her lap, as if guarding it. A younger woman wearing designer sunglasses indoors didn't even try to hide her confusion. Her brow furrowed, and her eyes followed Jada with disbelief, like she was trying to figure out how someone like her made it here. Jada kept her gaze down, focusing only on the seat numbers. 1A, 1B. Her heart sank as she passed them. "Please let this be over," she begged silently. "Just get to the seat, buckle in, disappear." Then finally, 2A. Her seat, window side. She stopped and turned awkwardly, trying to figure out where to put her backpack without knocking over someone's cocktail or bumping into a briefcase that looked more expensive than her entire college tuition. The flight attendant leaned in, gently offering to stow the bag for her, but her tone carried a hint of, "Let's not take too long, shall we?" Jada whispered a soft, "Thank you," barely audible, and eased into the luxurious leather seat that felt more like a throne than anything she'd ever sat in. She had no idea how to adjust the controls or use the touchscreen. There was a glass of champagne already poured, sitting in the recessed holder by her side, but she didn't touch it. She didn't even look at it. She didn't feel like this was for her. In her pocket, her phone buzzed. A message from her mom lit up the screen. "Call me when you land. Love you, baby. So proud." Jada held the phone for a second and typed back, "I feel like I'm not supposed to be here." She hit send and exhaled slowly, pressing her head back into the seat. Her palms were still sweating. She tried to focus on her breathing, on anything other than the hundreds of invisible threads of tension connecting her to every set of judging eyes around her. She thought about how she'd gotten here, about the early mornings, the double shifts, the night classes, and the countless times she had to tell herself one day, it'll all be worth it. But here, now, in the quiet judgment of this first class bubble, it didn't feel worth it. It felt suffocating, like she had won a prize meant for someone else. She remembered the airline worker earlier at the gate, the woman who approached her with a tablet in hand and said, "Jada Brooks, you've been upgraded to first class." Jada had thought it was a mistake. She'd booked the cheapest ticket. No extras, no expectations. When she asked why, the airline agent only smiled and said, "Someone on this flight requested it for you." No name, no explanation, just a mystery. And now here she was, trapped between gratitude and discomfort, between luxury and alienation. The plane rumbled softly as it prepared for takeoff. Jada closed her eyes for a moment. She didn't know that in just a few minutes, the mystery behind her upgrade would walk down the aisle and reveal himself. And she definitely didn't know that her life was about to change, not because of the seat she sat in, but because of what she represented, a reminder that hard work, resilience, and quiet courage could walk into any room, even the ones where people least expect it. Just hours earlier, Jada Brooks was sitting alone in the bustling terminal of JFK Airport, tucked into a hard plastic chair near Gate 43, surrounded by noise, strangers, and the low hum of overhead announcements. She wore the same gray hoodie and cap she always wore when traveling through unfamiliar spaces, blending in, staying small, and trying not to draw attention to herself. Her legs bounced nervously as she clutched her backpack, checking the departure board every few minutes, as if the letters might change and swallow her flight whole. This was her first time flying, ever. And it wasn't for vacation or some glamorous opportunity. She was headed to Los Angeles for a youth leadership conference hosted by a nonprofit she volunteered with on weekends back home in Atlanta. They'd paid for everything, registration, meals, even the flight. But it was a bare-bones economy ticket, the kind where you board last, sit in the middle row, and pray your knees don't touch the seat in front of you. She had zero expectations of comfort, luxury, or even space. Just getting to go was enough. She had sacrificed too much for this moment. Late nights studying for exams, early mornings feeding her twin brothers before school, every dollar she could save from her shifts at the nursing home. And now, sitting in that crowded terminal with tired travelers and loud children, she felt a mix of exhaustion and pride. But what happened next felt like something out of a movie. A sharply dressed airline employee began walking toward her, tablet in hand. Jada's first thought was, "What did I do wrong?" The woman stopped directly in front of her and asked, "Jada Brooks?" Jada nodded cautiously. "We've had a change in your seating," the woman continued. "You've been moved to first class. Please follow me." For a moment, Jada just blinked at her, unable to process the words. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Then finally, "Is this a joke?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, unsure if this was a mistake or a prank. The airline worker offered a polite smile, one that felt genuine but rehearsed. "No joke, ma'am. You've been upgraded by someone on board. That's all I can say." Jada's heartbeat quickened. "By who?" she asked. The woman just shook her head slightly. "They asked to remain anonymous." Jada hesitated. Every part of her wanted to question it, to double-check the name, the flight number, anything that would explain what was happening. But another part of her, the tired, overworked part, just wanted to feel like something good had finally landed in her lap without needing to fight for it. She stood up, slung her worn backpack over one shoulder, and followed the airline employee past rows of weary travelers and past the gate attendance counter, straight toward the boarding ramp. Her palms were sweaty, her throat dry. She felt like she was floating, unsure if this was really happening. As they boarded early, bypassing the long line of passengers waiting to squeeze into economy, Jada kept her head down. She didn't want to see the looks on people's faces, didn't want anyone to question why she was walking through the first-class door before most of them. And then she was there, inside the golden-lit, whisper-quiet oasis that was the first-class cabin. She'd seen it in movies, on TV, maybe even in Instagram reels, but never in person. The seats looked more like high-end recliners. Everything smelled like clean leather and citrus. Passengers were sipping complimentary champagne and flipping through international business magazines, barely noticing each other, until Jada stepped inside. Then, everything changed. Heads turned. Glasses paused mid-sip. Fingers stopped scrolling. Jada knew that look. It wasn't open hostility. It was confusion, curiosity, quiet judgment. Why is she here? The question echoed in their stares. A black girl in a hoodie didn't exactly scream corporate executive or luxury traveler. She didn't look like she belonged in that space, and the space made sure she felt it. Jada's eyes darted around, hoping the airline employee would stay beside her, but she'd already peeled off, heading toward the galley. Now Jada was standing alone in a world that didn't feel built for her. A tall flight attendant with perfect posture and a polished bun approached her. "Miss Brooks?" she asked with a practiced smile. Jada nodded silently, still trying to process it all. "Right this way," the attendant said, gesturing toward seat 2A with a white-gloved hand. Jada walked slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. As she passed the other passengers, she could feel their eyes scanning her, dissecting her outfit, her shoes, her face, her presence. A man in the second row leaned toward the person beside him and muttered something under his breath. A woman with pearl earrings shifted her handbag closer to her side. It wasn't loud, but it was palpable. The message, "She doesn't fit here." Jada felt her stomach twist into knots. She sat down at seat 2A, unsure of what to touch or how to act. Everything around her screamed money, comfort, privilege. Three things that had always been out of reach. The seat was soft, the space too large, the silence too suffocating. A glass of champagne had already been placed at her tray table, but she ignored it. She didn't drink, and even if she did, she wouldn't have dared to in this moment. All she could do was breathe and try not to look as nervous as she felt. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to her mother back in Atlanta. "I just got upgraded to first class. I don't know how. I feel weird." She stared at the message, hesitating, then added, "I don't think I belong here." She hit send and stared out the small oval window, hoping the clouds would come soon and take her away from the staring eyes, from the whispering doubts, from the sense that something was about to go terribly wrong or incredibly right. Little did she know, the person who made that upgrade happen was just a few feet away, and her life was about to change in a way no seat assignment could ever explain. Jada walked slowly down the plush, whisper-quiet aisle of first class, each step cushioned by the thick carpet beneath her sneakers. But every movement felt heavy, as if the weight of every stare behind her eyes added pounds to her feet. The overhead lights cast a soft, expensive glow across the cabin, highlighting polished mahogany panels and gold trim. This wasn't just another section of the plane. It was a different world altogether. The people she passed weren't just passengers. They looked like CEOs, influencers, investors, the kind of people who checked stocks mid-flight and never worried about hidden airline fees. She passed a row of men with tailored suits and identical silver watches, their conversation halting the moment they noticed her. One of them leaned toward another and muttered under his breath, but just loud enough for her to hear, "Guess they're letting anyone in here now." The words cut through her confidence like a knife through thread, small, subtle, but sharp, enough to leave a wound. Jada pretended not to hear, her face a practiced mask of indifference, but her chest tightened. Then there was the woman 2 rows ahead, all pearls and perfume, who glanced at Jada and offered a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes before tugging her handbag closer to her lap with slow, deliberate fingers. It wasn't a big movement. It was tiny, almost unnoticeable. But Jada noticed. Every micro-expression, every little gesture in this part of the cabin screamed a single message. "You don't belong here." Even the flight attendant, though polite, seemed to carry the same quiet confusion. She glanced down at Jada's boarding pass again, brows tightening just slightly, as though double-checking for a mistake. She didn't say anything, but the pause was long enough to sting. Jada offered a nervous, polite smile, just trying to make it to her seat without melting into the floor. The walk felt longer than it was. The aisle stretched like a red carpet she hadn't been invited to. Then, finally, 2A. Her seat. Window side. And unlike anything she'd ever sat in before. It wasn't just a seat. It was a capsule of wealth and quiet luxury. Soft leather, a personal touchscreen, a folded blanket like the ones they sell at fancy home stores. A neatly rolled warm towel sat on a tray beside a tall, gleaming glass of champagne, already fizzing with bubbles. But instead of feeling awe or excitement, Jada felt a heat rising up the back of her neck. Her palms were slick with sweat. Her breathing had gone shallow. She didn't even want to sit, like touching anything might prove she was out of place, like the very chair might reject her. But she sat anyway, lowering herself into the wide leather cushions slowly, cautiously, as though afraid she might trip some invisible alarm. Around her, conversation picked back up in hushed tones. A cough. The faint sound of cutlery clinking. But she still felt it. That burning sensation of being watched, dissected, judged. Jada didn't know whether it was paranoia or perception. All she knew was that she couldn't relax. She kept her backpack tightly wedged at her feet, arms stiff at her sides, trying to shrink into the seat. There was no comfort here, not really. Luxury only feels good when you believe you're allowed to have it. And Jada, at that moment, couldn't convince herself that she did. She turned her face slightly toward the window, not looking out but just trying to shield herself from more stares. Her fingers moved instinctively toward the pocket of her hoodie, where the fabric was familiar, soft, and worn from years of use. She pulled out her phone, the only thing in this space that still felt like hers. The screen lit up, a tiny beacon of home, and she opened her texts. Her thumbs hovered for a moment. She didn't want to worry her mom, but she couldn't hold it in. She typed, "I feel like I'm not supposed to be here." The words sat there for a second. Her throat tightened. She pressed send. That was all she could manage. Her mother had always taught her to walk with her head high, to know her worth. But it was hard to remember those lessons here, in this chilled, controlled space where even breathing felt monitored. A flight attendant passed by offering a warm towel with tongs. Jada flinched. "Would you like one, ma'am?" the woman asked kindly. Jada hesitated, then shook her head. "I'm okay, thank you." The attendant nodded and moved on, and Jada exhaled. She leaned back, not all the way, just enough to rest her shoulders. Her mind raced. Who had upgraded her? Why? And were they watching her now? Was it someone trying to be kind, or someone trying to prove a point? A social experiment? A game? The uncertainty gnawed at her. She wasn't used to receiving without explanation. She had worked for everything in her life. Scholarships, shifts, sacrifices. This golden seat, this surreal experience, it felt like something she'd borrowed without permission. She could feel her old insecurities crawling back. Not smart enough, not polished enough, not rich enough, not enough. She fought back the urge to cry, not because of one rude comment or one weird stare, but because in her heart she still struggled to believe she deserved anything beyond survival. And maybe that was the saddest part of all. She didn't feel angry. She didn't even feel surprised. Just tired. Tired of always having to explain herself. Tired of shrinking to make others comfortable. Tired of being grateful for scraps when she'd worked for so much more. Her phone buzzed again. A reply from her mom. "Yes, you are supposed to be there. Don't let anyone make you feel small. God puts you where you need to be." Jada stared at the message, her eyes blurring. She blinked quickly and took a deep breath. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe this wasn't a mistake. Maybe this was the universe reminding her she did belong. 20 minutes into the flight, just as the scent of warm garlic bread and roasted chicken drifted through the air, and flight attendants began quietly setting up trays for dinner service, the soft hush of first class was broken by a small, deliberate movement. A man in seat 1B, the very first row, stood up. He moved slowly, intentionally, the way people do when they have something important to say. He was older, maybe in his 60s, white, with neatly combed gray hair, a navy suit that fit perfectly, and a gold wedding band that glinted beneath the soft cabin light. His posture was calm but firm, the kind of presence that turned heads without a single word. Jada, still staring at the untouched glass of champagne on her tray and trying to make herself invisible, noticed his shadow first. He stepped into the aisle and walked directly toward her, his expression gentle, almost proud. As he reached her row, he leaned down slightly, not intrusively, but with a kind of quiet respect that immediately softened the air around them. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice calm, kind, and sure. Jada looked up, startled. Her mind raced. She'd never seen him before. She blinked. "Yes?" she replied cautiously, unsure of what was coming next. "My name is Richard," he continued. "I'm the one who moved you here." Her heart skipped. "Wait. What?" she said, blinking, trying to understand. "You upgraded me?" "Yes," he said with a warm smile. "A few months ago I spoke at a youth conference in Atlanta. You were on stage. You shared your story, how you were working overnight shifts, going to nursing school full-time, and still helping your mother raise your younger brothers. You spoke with such honesty. You talked about sacrifice, responsibility, and hope like they were normal things. But they're not. They're extraordinary." You left the entire room in silence. "I never forgot it." Jada's mouth dropped open. She didn't remember him. But then again, that night had been a blur of nerves and shaky hands and praying she wouldn't forget her words. She remembered standing under a spotlight, her palms sweating, speaking from her heart about what it meant to be young, black, and burdened, but hopeful. She never imagined anyone truly listening, especially not someone like him. Richard continued, "When I saw your name on the flight manifest, I recognized it instantly. I asked the airline if I could offer an upgrade. I told them I'd cover the cost. They agreed. You earned this seat long before this plane ever took off. I just made sure it was waiting for you." Jada couldn't speak. Her eyes welled. In her mind, she heard every insult she'd ever swallowed, every time someone assumed she wasn't enough, didn't belong. And here was this man, someone who had no reason to help, offering her not just a seat, but recognition. Respect. Around them, the cabin began to quiet again. First class had been watching, but now they were listening. Something in the atmosphere shifted. The men in suits who'd smirked earlier sat a little straighter. The woman with the pearls who had clutched her purse now looked thoughtful, curious even. One of the passengers, an older gentleman with a newspaper folded in his lap, leaned forward and asked softly, "Do you mind if I ask what youth group you work with?" His voice was no longer skeptical. It was genuine. Jada turned to him slowly, unsure how to even begin explaining. But before she could, the woman in pearls leaned over from across the aisle. Her expression had softened, eyes slightly widened. "You volunteer?" she asked. "My niece does something similar in Chicago. I think it's amazing what you're doing. Really." Jada nodded, her voice caught in her throat. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, not the respectful kind, not the admiring kind. Her instinct had always been to stay small, to prove herself quietly, to let the results speak instead of her voice. But suddenly, it felt like the room wanted her to be seen. And in that moment, something shifted inside her too. Richard gently placed a hand on the seat back in front of her, his smile unwavering. "I hope this small gesture reminds you that people do notice," he said. "Even when it feels like you're pushing uphill and no one's watching. Someone always is." Jada let out a shaky breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you. I didn't expect this." "You didn't ask for it," he said, standing straight again. "That's what makes you deserving." And with that, he returned to his seat. The cabin was quiet for another long beat. Then slowly, conversation resumed. But it was different now. The tone had shifted. The glances toward Jada no longer held skepticism or dismissal, but curiosity, even admiration. A couple of passengers leaned over to their travel partners, whispering softly, But this time with none of the sharpness from earlier. It was as if the story they'd built about who she was had just shattered in real time. And in its place, they saw someone far more powerful. Jada sat back, stunned, heart pounding, but no longer in fear. Her fingers trembled as she picked up her phone again. This time, she didn't just text her mom. She opened her camera, turned it toward the window, and took a photo of the clouds glowing under the late afternoon sun. Underneath it, by the end of the flight, everything had changed. The transformation didn't come suddenly, but rather gradually, as the flight progressed and Jada began to let go of the unease that had clung to her since she'd stepped into first class. She found herself laughing with the flight attendants, who had initially seemed tense but now shared genuine smiles. Jada was no longer just a stranger in the cabin. She was part of the story, part of the conversation. The passengers, who had once eyed her with confusion, now leaned in, eager to hear about the woman who had worked overnight shifts, studied tirelessly, and volunteered for causes bigger than herself. By the time the flight attendants made their final rounds, Jada was sharing her journey with passengers, listening to theirs, and connecting with people from all walks of life. One woman, who ran a health nonprofit in LA, even exchanged numbers with her, genuinely impressed by her story and her determination. And all of this had started with a single, unexpected gesture: Richard's decision to give her a seat upgrade. It was so much more than just a nicer chair on an airplane. Richard had given her a chance to be seen, not just as a student, not just as a volunteer, but as a person whose story mattered, someone worthy of being noticed. That simple act had shifted everything. When the plane finally began its descent toward Los Angeles, Jada stood taller. The clouds below were bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, and for the first time she truly saw herself in that light. She wasn't the girl from the crowded terminal, nervously clutching a boarding pass. She wasn't the girl who felt out of place in a world that often seemed to disregard her. No, she was someone who belonged, who had earned her place not just in first class, but in every space she entered. As the plane touched down on the runway, Jada sat up straight, her spine aligned with the newfound confidence that coursed through her. She may not have walked onto the plane with designer luggage or a business suit, but now she was walking off with something far more powerful. She had walked through the uncertainty, the awkwardness, the judgment, and had come out the other side stronger. The truth was, the world didn't get to decide where she belonged. That was up to her. And in that moment, Jada understood something deep. Her worth wasn't determined by the opinions of others. It was already inside her, and from now on, no one could take that away. And just like that, Jada's journey proves something we all need to remember. No matter where you start, or how others might see you, you have the power to define your own worth. Just like her, you belong in every room you walk into. If you're inspired by Jada's story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join the family. We're all about celebrating those who rise above the odds and remind us of the power of confidence, resilience, and never backing down. Until next time, stay strong and keep striving. Your story is just getting started.